Hello, I'm Jeffrey Halley, and welcome to BizTech's CEO Conversation Show. Today we have Interactive Brokers LLC with us. Uh, Interactive Brokers is a household name to, I'm sure, all of our viewers. It's an American multinational brokerage firm. It operates the largest electronic trading platform in the United States by number of daily average revenue trades. And the company brokers stocks, options, futures, EFPs, which I have to go back to my futures days to remember, but I do with fondness. Futures, options, forex, bonds, funds, and also some cryptocurrencies, if that wasn't a big enough product suite for you. And to tell us more about this today, we have Yujun Lin, the CEO of Interactive Brokers in Singapore. Yujun, thanks very much for being here.
Thank you. Thanks, Jeffrey. And I'm glad to be here. And thanks for having me.
Right, well, let's get straight into the questions then. The obvious question is, tell us about Interactive Brokers and tell us about your role in the company.
Okay. Well, this is the big question because we've been in existence. So IBLC, we've been around for many years, 30 years, as an online broker. And you said, we've grown tremendously, and now we are one of the largest platforms, not just in America, but around the world, right? In Europe and also in Asia Pacific. So I kind of need to rewind that clock a little bit to the start, where our founding chairman, Mr. Thomas Petterfee, he started back in 77 trading options on an individual basis. And then in 82, which coincidentally was the year that I was born, I hope I'm not giving way too much private information here, but back
I
in
was born before you. I'm used to it by
now. Yeah. And so in 82, we started formally as Timber Hill, which is a market maker. And in 83, we pioneered the use of handheld computers on the trading floor. And that really shows, I think, the DNA of the company. We are pioneers, we are innovators, we are basically fintech before fintech was a thing. Yeah. So we kind of built on that. So at some point, we were the largest market maker in the world. And then I think in the 90s, we pivoted to start an online brokerage because we felt that we had built a very powerful platform for professional traders and market makers. And we wanted to kind of share that with your, average investor. And that story, if you look at our share price and how the company has grown in the past 20, 30 years, that has almost become legend, right? And so we stand today with over 2 million customer accounts, and we have presence in many countries around the world. We cover 150 markets. So that has been the story of Interactive Brokers overall in 3 minutes, right?
Well, it's certainly, I come from a background in the markets as well, and I spent many, many years, well over a decade, with Saxo Bank, which was another pioneer in the space. But I think with our compatriots, we were a late 90s generation, and Interactive Brokers was clearly 15 years ahead of that when you talk about these fintech type companies. I would love to have seen a photo of what a handheld computer looked like, though, in the 1980s on the stock market floor.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll send you a photo across to you. We made a little video about that about 10 years back. It's basically, black and white LCD screens back in the day, right?
And yourself, you're the CEO of Singapore. Is it just Singapore, or is it an Asian role?
Yes, that's right. So I'm officially the CEO of Singapore. We got our license here about 5 years back in 2019 because we thought that Singapore was a very important hub for growth. So we already have an office in Hong Kong, and that is our Asia Pacific headquarters. But we saw specific potential in Singapore, given how the country has grown, given its trading roots. So I'm a Singaporean born and bred. So I know very well what we are good at, and what we are good at is international trade. And that has served us well for many years. And going into, I suppose the 21st century, I think this part of the world will continue to grow in terms of the digital economy. And I think Interactive Brokers really wanted to be a part of that growth.
So let's talk about Interactive Brokers itself now in the present day. It has shown consistent earnings growth, and that was carried on last quarter. But you and I both know that this space is an extremely competitive space. What does Interactive Brokers do to stay ahead of the crowd? I mean, you must have a fairly sophisticated user base anyway, looking at the platform itself. It's certainly not a beginner's platform, but what is Interactive Brokers' secret sauce in this respect?
Well, good thing is that we're a public company, so the secret sauce is actually, what everybody can see, right?
Mm.
Um, so if I would go actually back to the fundamentals of what a fintech is, and it's really about automating as much as we can, and thereby keeping our costs low, and then being able to scale up the number of users and therefore the revenue that comes with those users. And again, I want to go back to what our founding chairman, Mr. Thomas Petterfee, had originally set out as his vision, which is to create technology to provide liquidity on better terms. And that means that we compete on price, we compete on speed, size, diversity of our product range, and also our advanced trading tools. And I think that kind of sums up what we are about. And we've stuck to that mission and stayed true to it for 30 years now. And that, in a way, is our secret sauce, right? Which is to keep our cost base contained while scaling out in terms of functionality and the number of users that can use that functionality.
So you've talked about products in that last answer, and I'm guessing someone like Interactive Brokers has got to be constantly innovating on product offerings. What recent product offerings has the company introduced?
That's a great question. And I would say that our global trading platform, that is the core product, and we're always constantly pushing the boundaries on, what better tools can we give to our clients to use and access the markets. One will be, we've recently put out a revamped trader workstation that is our core trading platform that everybody uses to trade on our platform. And I think we were basically trying to find a way where we can convey that sophistication of the tools and the power behind our trading algorithms to as many people as possible. So we're making our platform a lot more user-friendly and to update it to modern standards. And I think that has been, a singular focus of ours for the past few years, because these things, they don't build themselves, right? And it does take significant time and resources to upgrade your system. So we're very proud of what we put out. So we call it IBKR Desktop. And that full-featured version is now out and available for everyone to use.
Yeah, I think UX is something that's very important in this day and age, especially because people's spans of attention are so short, aren't they? So if it's not easy to use, then your product itself has got challenges straight away. Let's talk about profit margins now. So I believe that Interactive Brokers' latest profit margin had increased to 13.8%, which I believe is pretty impressive for the sector, to be honest. Tell us about how you've managed to achieve these constant improvements in profit margins.
Well, like I mentioned earlier, I think a lot of it is really keeping our cost base contained and doing what we're good at, which is automating and bringing new markets to our clients with an existing resources, right? So basically doing more with the same, or potentially doing more with less. And that is very much the DNA of the company. To be more specific, I'll give you a personal example. So in Singapore, we are definitely in growth and expansion mode. But I also start every year with zero marketing budget, right? So we don't do a top-down approach to say, oh, you have X dollars and you need to spend it, or you do
Very
so,
interesting.
which is basically, what we have for a lot of other companies that I've seen and worked for. We start with zero, If we want to do something, we see an opportunity, we can put it up, we will justify it, and then we'll get it done. Right? So it's a very bottom-up approach. And I think that helps to contain the cost. We apply that to headcount, to business travel, to essentially everything that we do that costs money. And I think that has allowed us to stay very profitable and actually continue to be profitable and more profitable in the future as we acquire new clients onto the platform.
I guess that allows you to be much more dynamic in all those verticals as well, rather than starting off with, this is what you've got in each of these verticals at the start of each year, which is pretty much the experience I've had for most of my career. It's actually a very dynamic bottom up rather than a very fixed top down approach.
Yes, very much so. And if I look at the way we run the company, so I think we have about 3,000 employees globally now. We've got 40 in Singapore from 5 years ago. So we are on a very good pace of growth, but we obviously want to grow our revenue faster than when we grow our headcount, for example. And back to the point that you made about being flexible, absolutely, because we have the ability to decide where do we want to invest the most resources in. And I do hear internally that a large part of our employees, more than half of our employees, are developers and engineers. And that allows us that internal resource, the internal capability to quickly scale our products that are working well, and also to build new product.
And I'm guessing it allows you to innovate at quite a fast pace as well.
Yes, absolutely, it does.
Let's talk about one of your product areas. So my time in the markets, which stretches back over decades, I'd admit it. So I wish I was born in the 1980s, but actually I started working then. Options, that's what I always remembered Interactive Brokers being famous for, was options trading. So can you tell our viewers more about options trades and why, I guess, Interactive Brokers became associated with them? And I guess that means by default, they were also very popular with your customers.
Yeah. So again, very much in our DNA, we were at one point a very large automated market maker for not just equities, but also options. And so we have very powerful tools that we've developed on our platform, for our own people, professional market makers to use, but also we've opened that up to the street. So we've kind of democratized that a little bit. If you look at client demand for options, I think a lot of people find that they are a lot more flexible than just trading plain equity. So of course, it requires you to put a little bit of work into it because options are complex. And I think it's important that people don't just jump in because, it's the hottest new product that's out there being traded, right? You do need to do your homework, but once you do, and you figure out how to trade options on top of your existing stock portfolio, then you find that, there are a lot of strategies that open up for you. And I think that's what the market is finding now, right? Give you a very specific example. The Magnificent Seven stocks in the US have done very well in the past months, but to a point where they're starting to look a little bit toppish, right? And
it's
so
interesting who's selling on an insider basis at the moment from reading in the press in the weekend.
Yeah. So, profit taking, right? It's something that we can definitely expect when the stock price is high. So to the man in the street, to the investor in the street, the question is really, should I load up more? Should I take my profit? Or do I continue to believe in these companies fundamentally over the long term? And, having owned some Magnificent Seven stock, for example, the investor could use options to either enhance their yield by writing covered calls. That's a strategy that we've seen that's been popular recently. Or they can use options to take a leverage directional view on the market, right? If you think that the stocks will continue to go up, you can always buy a call, and then your downside is limited on that, but you do get to participate in the upside, right? So like I said, it opens up a lot of new flexible trading strategies so that your core portfolio remains the same while you can take short-term, medium-term views using those options. And I think that has really driven the increased use of options over time that we've seen.
Let's take a macro view now. Let's step back and have a look at the markets themselves. What fundamental forces are you do you believe are driving financial markets at the moment?
Okay, well, I think we definitely need to start with what 2024 is in terms of inflation and also the Federal Reserve. And we've seen that inflation remains quite stubborn. In fact, I think it was probably a little bit higher than we thought it will be, which is why the market is now saying that there will not be six rate cuts like they had anticipated at the start of the year. It's probably going to look more like two or three, and the first one is probably going to be in June, if at all, right? Depending on how the inflation looks then. And I think that reflects where we are in the world today. Inflation will continue to be sticky because geopolitically, things remain very challenging. All these, I suppose I'll call it geopolitical tensions and conflicts. They will keep supply side economics expensive, right? And that feeds into overall inflation because underpinning everything will be the price of oil, the price of energy, logistics, shipping. These are things that are fundamental to our society today, right? And as long as these disruptions will continue to be there, prices will continue to be high. So I think that it's the background that for the situation that we live in today. At the same time, I think climate change is going to be a big thing. In Singapore right now, we are going through a heat wave and also, I think, record high rainfall. So, the weather's all wonky now. To deal with climate change is expensive, right? We are currently inventing and using new technologies for not just energy generation, but, overall, how do we live more sustainably? And all this money that's going to research and new products and new services is great because that basically enables our continuity as a species on this planet. But that will also drive costs up. So if I take a medium to long-term view, a personal view on inflation and prices, I think that will continue to be high, right? There's a countervailing force. My last point on this will be that of AI. And that's very interesting because we are finding new applications to this. If you're playing AI bingo, you get to check that box right now, right? Now that we've mentioned it, I think it does represent the next step change in human productivity. Similar to how, we went through the Industrial Revolution and all the other technological revolutions, right? From the Stone Age to the digital age that we live in today. AI is just part of that natural evolution of human potential. And I think that is the big promise in the future. Of course, it brings with it, potential societal change that governments and everybody has to deal with. But overall, if you look at how technology has progressed the human race over time, I think that will lead to massive improvements in productivity. And you can see that priced into the markets, which is why the Magnificent Seven stocks, most of them tech and AI stocks, are doing so well today.
Yeah, I don't think we've had a single guest this year in one of our verticals who hasn't actually mentioned AI. As you said, it's the next societal step. It can't be ignored. Let's stick with inflation just for a moment now. We've seen higher inflation prints than expected from both Singapore and Malaysia recently this week. And the prints themselves were expected to rise, but they've risen by more than the markets had expected. That circles back to what you said about inflation being just a bit stickier than many of the participants in the market had hoped. How do you think sticky global inflation is going to impact Asian economies?
That's a very, very good question. For smaller countries in Asia, like Singapore, I think we are mostly a price taker, very much affected by the global tide. And so if that tide is rising, inflation, we will be impacted by it in the same direction, right? There'll be very high correlation. And I think we just need to deal with that inflation. If you look at the local landscape, part of the growth potential that I mentioned earlier about Singapore is, Singapore becoming a wealth hub. So we've attracted a lot of high net worth and also fund management AUM over the years. That also causes inflation. So there's always this, duality to it, right? On the pro side, on the yang side, if you will, we have trickle-down effects on the economy, right? Everybody gets jobs, financial sector is booming, everything looks good. But on the yin side of that duality is that, prices are going up and people, men in the street, are feeling those effects. And I think that pivot that we've seen over the past 20 years of AUM and trading activity to the East, to Asia and emerging Asia specifically, I think, that drives some of the inflation here, right? But it's not necessarily a bad thing.
It's an amazing place to live, Singapore, frankly, and but it is a trading nation. It has very open barriers. As you said, you're a price taker, particularly with things like just foodstuffs and energy and water, etc., etc. So, I mean, as you said, it's a yin and a yang, isn't it? You become very responsive as an economy because of that, but you can't really divorce yourself like we can here in Indonesia now from some of those market forces that are sweeping around the world.
Yeah, so I would see it as a continuum, as a spectrum. Some countries, especially smaller ones in scale, will be more affected by global inflation. The larger ones, with some natural resources, are able to insulate themselves a little bit, but not completely, right? If you look at, the grain situation in Europe, for example, that is a very good example of, big countries, they produce their own grain, but their farmers are being affected by cheaper grain from elsewhere. Right.
And
So governments just have to deal with that.
And they're pretty angry about it. And they're not the only angry farmers around the world, though, I must say, though. We've talked about, we've mentioned fintech a few times now, and Singapore is a fintech hub. Do you think that companies are moving to Singapore, these fintech companies, to become fintechs in the Singapore market, or is it that they're using Singapore as a base to launch to, say, the rest of Southeast Asia? And the reason I'm asking this is because there's been a lot of talk about digital banks in Singapore, but when you look at the big three banks in Singapore, and I still bank with one of them, they're very, very tech savvy. In fact, they're probably more tech savvy than other banks that I deal with in other parts of the world where I've lived. So I'm wondering if actually the noise is about whether Singapore is a launch pad to the rest of the region, or whether, and just how much space there actually is in the Singapore market.
Yeah, so again, I will look at this from both the positive and the negative side of things, right? I think we are very realistic people, Singaporeans. We are quite worldly, given, the size of the country. So we know that the domestic market is limited. Not necessarily small, but limited. On the plus side, our citizens tend to be very well educated, very tech savvy. I was just looking the other day, I saw an article about how our government has done a tremendous job in getting everybody online through our national identity card. Right, so now that's transited to an app by the government called SingPass or MyInfo. And that allows Singapore citizens to access like 99% of government services online. And having that digital identity also allows the local market clients to onboard financial services or any other digital service, really. And I think that has been a very powerful force and probably attracted all these fintechs to set up, because, to tap into the local ecosystem is as easy as integrating to the SingPass API.
I love SingPass.
Yeah, it is.
I can honestly say, when you move to another country, you're ruined after living in Singapore, because it's just all so fantastically well built and organized, the technology side and the access to government services. You really become spoiled in a way, because then you go back to real life and other parts of the world, and it's you sort of cry a bit when you have to, and that's one of the reasons I miss Singapore, I can honestly say.
Yeah, I think, every country has their own journey. I think in Singapore, we were quite lucky to be small enough
Mm,
that, you can roll this out on a national level and it works relatively well.
mm,
Having control over that is very, very helpful. And I think to the second part of your question, which is are fintechs coming here to set up for Singapore or the region? I think it's probably both, right? It's a good place to start.
mm,
I've heard Singapore called Asia Light. So it's an easy place to live in. Everybody speaks English more or less. Everything's digital. It, starting a business is easy, right?
mm,
And so the infrastructure is great. On the other hand, the market is small and it can be expensive. And it can be expensive also to hire talent. So I think this is more in the medium term, it's a great place to be, but you can't just come here and set up and hope to mine the local market and not do anything else, right? You probably want to have regional ambitions, so that you can really scale that revenue, similar to how Interactive Brokers has done over here.
mm. Let's we can't leave this alone. We have to go back to AI. I just can't
Okay.
help myself here.
Sure, why not?
How do you think AI is going to impact online stock trading?
That's a very, very good question. I think, our approach so far has been fairly cautious, right? Because on one hand, while, it's a fantastic new technology and it's great fun, asking ChatGPT all sorts of funny questions, uh, and even, letting it help, I would say, with your school essay, for example. We do want to be very sure when we implement it fully that it is giving accurate information, right? So
Mhm.
that question of hallucinations in AI, that is very real. It's still a non-zero rate. Even the best large language models out there are still, doing like maybe a 2-3% hallucination rate, which, in the grand scheme of things doesn't seem so much, but if you're talking about dollars and cents,
Mm.
you might actually cause people to lose money, right? So that's very important. We want to get that as close to zero as possible. Um, And I think, the potential for this is actually amazing, right? I spoke earlier about how it is the next phase in basically human evolution, in that it will help us be more productive. I think the ability to scale up, that potential is tremendous, right? So it's not what we are currently doing, but I've heard of a research firm, for example, that
Mm.
has trained the AI model to fully replicate the recommendations made by their human analysts, right? And instead of using that to replace their analysts, what this company has done is it has scaled up significantly. So now instead of covering 1,000 stocks, you can cover 10,000 stocks.
Okay.
And the role of the human in this thing then changes, right? It evolves. So you are not just responsible for generating research and views, but you're also now in charge of vetting and making sure that the AI generated stuff is also accurate, right? So that potential to scale up is amazing, and it keeps everybody employed still, right? Just that your role will change. And I would say one other thing that the promise of AI has done is that, we live in an age of perhaps too much information. There are a lot of analysts out there, some of them now AI, there's a lot of information, a lot of data hitting the markets
Absolutely.
every day. There are a million channels and different streams of media to look at.
Mm.
One thing I found in my own personal life, not necessarily for work, but for, myself, which is I use AI to summarize information for me.
Yeah, my wife does the same thing actually. She has a very demanding high-level job here in Jakarta, and like you, I'm sure she's very time poor because of it. And she's been using it for some very clever things to achieve that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think asking AI to summarize stuff kind of keeps it grounded
Mm.
in facts that it can already find online. And I think this is completely anecdotal. I don't know whether it actually works, but some being a little bit clever about the prompts that you send in to use the AI, I think allows you to remove some of that hallucination, the problems with fake information that is generating.
Well, from AI to another abbreviation, shall we call it, that was on the tip of everyone's tongues over the last year until AI came along, and that is ESG investing. Now, I know this is under pressure in some parts of the United States in particular. There's been some pushback there against some of the big proponents of ESG investing. What impact is ESG investing having on the financial markets at the moment?
So I think ESG investing, is something that's permeated society, right? They need to be green, they need to be sustainable. How we've responded to it is that we've made sure that we have as much ESG data as possible. We've created an application that allows people to apply a kind of like an ESG filter on their existing portfolio, right? So it's an impact app, we call it, on the phone, and it allows you to look at your portfolio in ESG terms, right? Because people are getting more educated about this. And I think over time, the financial markets will reach a place where people will invest along ESG lines very much. But I do see it as kind of like a secondary or tertiary outcome, because if you talk about ESG and being sustainable and saving the world from climate change, this is actually a very fundamental thing. It goes down to the basic industries of energy, of construction, of logistics, where that change really needs to happen. And what we do in the financial markets is, essentially allocation of capital. So that will help speed it up and encourage it. But I think no amount of financial market allocation can take away from basic economics, essentially. Right. So I think as governments become more willing to act on sustainability, as the investing and actually, frankly, the voting population, as this becomes more of an issue to them, then we will see change accelerate. And when that happens, we'll be there. We'll be ready for that.
It's very interesting when you look at the viewpoints from what they describe as the global south, and I'm not sure what they call the global north. I didn't used to call it that, but they have this term global south now.
Yeah, I've come across that. Yeah,
yeah, there's some quite big divergences and opinions there, and I've often wondered. Coal's one that everyone loves to hate, but you can't just tell these countries to stop using coal if they don't have a substitute. And I think Indonesia and India would be classic examples of two giant economies. They need to keep the lights on in their countries. They can't just substitute it because someone in perhaps a more developed country says that that's what they should do. And I think this is one of the tension points in ESG, I believe, going forward.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, again, to be very practical, every country is trying, we're all just trying to get by. Right? We're trying to survive. We're trying to give our citizens a good quality of life. And along with that comes, the idea of economic growth. And, for some countries, really much poorer countries, it's not even about economic growth, right? It's about, getting
surviving.
Energy, electricity, right? It's about survival, electricity, clean water, sanitation. So that is a very difficult topic for the world to to tackle. Although personally, I do have hope. If you look at, I think maybe 10, 20 years ago, there was this whole thing about the hole in the ozone layer that was being caused by the CFCs, the chlorofluorocarbons. I think the world came together then to ban it. And we managed to now heal the ozone layer, right? The biggest one was, I think, over Australia. I think that's gone now.
New Zealand. I'm a Kiwi. Zealand, right? It's very easy to get sunburned in New Zealand. And a lot of it was that ozone hole, actually.
Yeah, but that has mostly healed over, if not completely healed over. And I think that was a good example of how, the world got together and said, we've got a problem, let's solve it. So I am somewhat hopeful that, we will be able to do that. The question, of course, is will we be able to do that in time?
Well, we have to remain positive. Otherwise, there was no point in us even having this interview today, was there? Hey, Yujun, I've kept you long enough. You're a busy man. Have you got any final thoughts that you'd like to share with our viewers today that we haven't covered?
Yes, I would like to say that, it's been a very interesting journey for me personally, right? I've about 16 years of experience, 17 years of experience in the financial markets. And I think, seeing how the financial markets have evolved over time, I've come to the conclusion that everything's going to be digital and most things will be automated in the future. And therefore, I'm glad to be part of Interactive Brokers because I think we've kind of have that on track.
Sagely words. Eugene, thanks so much for taking time for being on the show today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
It's been an absolute pleasure. We've been speaking to Yujun Lin, the CEO of Interactive Brokers in Singapore. I'm Jeffrey Halley, and you've been watching and listening to BizTech CEO Conversation Show. This interview will be on our website, www.biztech.asia, as well as our social media platforms. You'll also be able to see it on our syndication partners, TV stations, radio stations, and websites. Thanks so much for tuning in today.